Thank you guys again for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Dennisha. I am the webinar manager for Científico Latino for this year. And then Roberto, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Roberto Rodriguez Cartagena, and I'm this year's webinar coordinator, and I'll be working with Dennisha on webinars this year.
Thank you. Okay, so today's webinar is going to be about applying to STEM graduate programs, and we have Yaniris and Aníbal, who are our co-panelists, who I will introduce in just a second. And so a little bit about me, I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in the neuroscience grad program at the University of Rochester. I graduated from Agnes Scott in 2019. I double majored in neuroscience and public health. At the time, I was on the pre-med track, thought I was going to go to medical school, and then I changed my mind. I did one summer research opportunity. And then after graduating undergrad, I did a post-bac program in neuroscience at the Oregon Health Science University. And then I had applied to graduate school once, but I didn't really have guidance and help, so it was unsuccessful. I ended up being waitlisted. And then after my post-bac program, I reapplied to different graduate programs, and I got 4 interviews and 4 acceptances, and I never took the GRE. So next up, I'll have Aníbal introduce himself.
Right, yep. So, hey everyone, I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate in biochem at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Before getting in here, I did a prep program. So between graduating from my undergrad and getting into grad school, I was part of an extensive 1-year research program to help me become a stronger applicant. I did graduate from University of Puerto Rico with a couple of summer internships of research under my belt, and then I majored in integrative biology. It's notable that I applied to grad school twice. First time it didn't work out for me. So in 2018, I was rejected without interviews from 10 programs, and a couple of things happened in between 2018 and 2019, which I'll discuss later during the talk, which actually made me quite a good prospective student for all these programs that previously rejected me. I did take the GRE twice, but I did not submit my second time, and I took the TOEFL once. And these last bullet points are things I'll be discussing quite abundantly during my section. So I think Jenny is next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Yaniris Molina-Aponte, and I guess, wow, I'm a second year now, PhD student in the Immunology program at Harvard. I'm an NSF fellow, and I'm also, kind of like a certificate program. If you guys have questions, we can talk a little bit more about it later. But it's a program for people that are interested in more translational research at uni. And then after I graduated in 2020 from the University of Puerto Rico at Macau, where I major in biology and microbiology and minor in chemistry, I was kind of like undecided because, as Dennisha mentioned earlier, I also kind of like wanted to go into medicine, and that changed. And I took time off to really clear my mind and figure out what I really wanted. And so I worked as a tech and lab manager at Johns Hopkins for 2.5 years. During undergrad, I also had a few research experiences and professional development programs that I did. And I also did research throughout my whole bachelor's at UPRH. And then for grad school, I did have to take the TOEFL, but I did not have to take theory. None of the programs that I applied to required it, so I didn't have to. So yeah, for the first part of this webinar, we're going to be talking a little bit more about PhD programs in general, and then particularly a little bit more of STEM PhD programs. And you guys, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A. We'll try to answer as we go. But yeah, you might be wondering, what is a PhD program in STEM, right? And so all the information that we're going to talk in the next few slides is going to be relevant for PhD programs in STEM in the United States. It's different for different countries around the world. But if you have questions, we can talk about that later too. One of the big important things about doing a PhD is that it's free. So your department will pretty much cover all your costs, whether this is health insurance, tuition, and they will provide you with a stipend as well. The other thing is that, you gain independence. I think this is something that's really important. And, I think now as a grad student, I even appreciate it a little bit more as an undergrad, whether this is doing research in your university or during different summer opportunities. The kind of research that you do generally is not as independent, and you will see that once you enter your PhD program. So one of the skills that you gain is to really become an independent scientist and to design and execute and manage your own experiments. At the same time, you gain expertise. You're going to be working in a very specific kind of like niche problem that you're trying to solve. So basically you become an expert, and because it's something that it's novel and no one has worked before, it's really nice that you basically generally by the end of your PhD, you will be like literally the world expert on that specific topic. And then the other big thing is you gain a ton of skills, right? Some of these you might have started working on as you start on your, scientific journey, whether this is through your bachelor's or different experiences that you have. But generally, one of the most important ones during your PhD are critical thinking, project management, and time management. Oh my God, that one. Networking, writing, teaching, and also communication skills are critical. And those are things that you will sharpen as you go through your PhD journey. And lastly, the other big thing is that there are multiple career paths. So PhD is also great because even if you come with an idea of what you want to do next, there's always opportunities for you to expand and learn about other careers that you might actually develop an interest in. And there's so many. You can stay in academia, you can go into industry, you can go into the government, consulting, science policy, science communication, amongst many others. So by the end of your PhD, you basically can do whatever you want, and that it's pretty amazing. And then the other question that's really important, right, and it's really critical, is how to choose a PhD program. And the idea is that you want to choose a PhD program that is a fit for you. It's like the most important thing. And so one of the things that you could consider, right, it's your field of interest. You can select a particular program based on your experiences, whether this is your academic background or other research experiences you might have. And this can be anything from like immunology, data science, engineering, and so on. If you're unsure because you might be interested in multiple things at the same time, then the option is that you can actually apply to umbrella PhD programs. And basically the umbrella, it's like a track that allows you to explore different disciplines and do rotation in different areas. And by the end of your first year, when you join a lab, then whatever, track or specific department that the lab is affiliated with, then that's your PhD program, basically. The other thing is that if you're applying to a discipline that's not necessarily on your main field, you will definitely have to fulfill some coursework requirements before applying, and you can check this in whichever program you're applying to. You can go to their website and you can double check the coursework requirements and see if you need to take them. This is really important because if you do, you want to keep that in mind and maybe start that course even before you apply, because you probably won't be able to apply at the same time as you're taking the course, because you'll need the course transcript for your application. And so an example could be that you're moving from a developmental biology major to a neuroscience PhD program. And then just like, as I mentioned earlier, just revise all the requirements of the programs that you're interested in before you submit your application. And even if it's sometimes the websites and the information is not super clear, you can always reach out to programs administrators, chairs, or program directors via email, and they'll hopefully get back to you with the information you need. And so the other big thing is research labs, right? I think something that's really important, and this is an advice I also got myself when I was applying, is to find at least 5 professors that you're potentially interested in working with. And this is critical because even if you have this one professor that you're like, definitely I'll probably just join this lab because we've had interactions before, because maybe I did a summer research experiment with this professor, things can happen. And among these things can be that, the PI might not have literally space for you in the lab, or financial support to like pay for you throughout your PhD, or be on a sabbatical in a different university. And not be physically there. So these are things that might be happening, and they might not be obvious. So you'll need to reach out to those PIs ahead of time, and we'll talk about it a little bit later as well in the workshop. And then the other thing that you can do also is that reach out, like I just said, a PI that you might be interested in working with, and ask them straight up, will you be taking students this upcoming academic year? Because that way you make sure that the person that you're interested in can have you, and then you add that in your application, whether it's your essay, or sometimes applications have space for you to name drop faculty, and then you can just put that name. And the other thing is that there are programs that when you apply, this is actually required. And some people don't know this, but it's really important for you to check. And for those programs, the most important ones are like computer science, psychology, clinical psychology, and ecology and evolutionary biology. You have to contact PIs before you apply, at least 3. And so special programs and resources are another area that you can consider for your program. And this can be internships or partnerships that they have with industries, medical classes auditing if you're interested in more clinical stuff, dual degrees opportunities, whether this is a PhD and a JD, like you want to be a lawyer, or an MBA if you're interested in business, career development programs, and extra financial support via different programs or fellowships that might be internal. There's also teaching opportunities, and for some programs, this might be required, and generally it depends on the uni, but if you TA and it's required, they generally won't pay for you, like for you to work as a TA, whether there are other opportunities or unis where basically you can TA, but because it's not required, they'll pay you. So like on top of your stipend, you'll have like X amount of money throughout the semester because you're technically working as a TA or a teacher assistant or teaching fellow. So this is something that, again, it varies between programs. So you might need to contact them ahead of time and make sure, do I have to TA or not? And then another critical thing, and this is really important, location and the community. So location, this is important in terms of like maybe how close or far you're from your family, and also weather-wise, if you're a person that likes, the winter or the sun and beaches and being able to be warm. These are things that are really important, especially as you undertake this journey that's, it's going to be challenging, and there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be happening. You want to be in a space that it's supportive and that you feel comfortable. And so you might take that into consideration when you select the different programs that you're applying. And then if you're interested in community in terms of it being diverse and supportive, you can contact students ahead of time and try to gauge, what is the climate in that unit specifically. And this goes with the last point, right? Like diversity. You can ask the programs, and you can ask the current students or students that have recently graduated about resources that they might have for other minority students. And if the students are happy, generally, it's a really big indication that the program is good. And so this is a critical question that I just asked myself as well, because I literally just joined a lab. So I was struggling with this myself. So how do you choose a research advisor? And this is some advice that I got myself and I used to make that my decision. And a friend mentor once told me that this is the most critical decision that you make in grad school. So it's really important and it should not be underappreciated. And some of the things that you might consider, right, when you make this big decision is how supportive your PI is, right? Like how available is this person to meet with you and to hear you. And I think it's important to add that, you don't want a PI that's just going to hear you professionally. Like you're a human, you're going to go through experiences and personal situations or challenges that you need to be comfortable sharing those with your PI. So I think that's another important consideration. The other thing is a publication record. Generally for programs, like technically it's not required for you to have a publication, but it's a given. So you will work on a specific project that you will publish. And so it's important for you to join a lab that has a good publication record, and then you can get that, and that's confirmed pretty much. So you can look at either websites or like PubMed or different areas and you put your PI's name, and you can see that record, how recently they published, how much they published, and you can get that information ahead of time. Just generally, right, you want your PI or your advisor to be a good role model, someone that you kind of admire and you're like, wow, this person, like I kind of want to be like that. And then they're collaborative, they might get you to network with other people or like have established collaborations with different labs that could, you know, propel your project, and that they introduce you or name drop you in different spaces to help you build your career. And then lastly, that they champion diversity and inclusion, you know, that they either have a diverse lab or like uplift diverse scientists and so on. And so for wrapping up this part, I wanted to give you an example, kind of a real example. Obviously, things were twinkle a little bit, but this is a safe space and we wanted to give you some insight on the things that might happen, right? So for this, I built this case study where you have a prospective PhD student that's searching for a really good lab, right? It's trying to do the research to make sure, you know, that she informs herself. So her name's Jasmine, and Jasmine identifies as a minority student in STEM. She's applying to PhD programs in immunology. She wants a career in academia, wants to have her own group. And, you know, she understands how important it is to find a really good PI and a lab that's a good fit for her. So when she's applying, she had this great interaction with this PI and she felt like they really, really connected and that this person was kind and that, wow, this could be a really good potential advisor. But she knew that, you know, it's just one interaction. She wanted to get more information. So she decided to reach out to other grad students, and students that rotated in that lab actually didn't join. And then in that conversation, she decides to message one of those students that rotated and didn't join. And she contacts this person. She says like, hey, you know, I hope you're doing super well. Like I rotated in X lab and I was wondering if you could share a bit about your experience. Like my interaction with this person was great and I'm really considering this lab. And the person said like, yeah, for sure. It was my least favorite rotation. So like not off to a great start. So then Jasmine says like, I'm good. And then the person says, I can write you a text summary or maybe we can meet in person in the next few days. Meet in person. That kind of argues that something happened, that this person's not comfortable probably writing it for you, like either in a message or an email. And I think, you know, this is something that maybe when you have the experience to get interactions with people, whether this is virtually or in person in interviews and all that, it's really important to like gauge the environment. And this is a message that kind of argues that it wasn't a really nice space to be in. So it's important for you to do this, regardless of the program that you're applying, connect with people, current students, and students that maybe rotated in the lab and didn't join, engage if it's a really safe space for you to be in.
All right, thank you so much, Jenny. That was amazing. And let's get started with my section. I was trying to answer a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I don't know if Jenny, you want to take a minute to check any of them out in case we want to answer before proceeding to the next section. Right. All right, so do we want to answer any questions live, or if not, that's okay too.
We could do it maybe at the end. I'm trying to answer some like here in the chat and then maybe leave some, the most important ones maybe, or the ones that are repeated in the end. Thanks.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, as you kind of saw from the previous slide where I had my little red box, the red box was meant to kind of showcase how in this section, we're going to be talking a little bit more intentionally about aspects that really helped me get into grad school and the difference between this 2018 and 2019 cycles. Jenny told us what it's like to apply to a PhD, how you apply to a PhD, and today I'll be talking a little bit more about why you should be applying to a PhD, which is a really important question, not only while you're applying for the program itself, but also even once you join. These are documents that you will be preparing as a primer for your future. And when things get rough or experiments stop working and days get gloomy, because that always happens, be it in PhD or any other phase, you need to remind yourself and be able to ground yourself on why you're doing this program, because it is an intensive program and it's important to consider this. So if we can continue. I like to showcase this little a diagram when I give talks about how, as y'all are in different educational stages, be it in your master's, bachelor's, or even in across doing gap years, just an extent of knowledge that you can get to. However, as you surpass areas of your work where you get to like a PhD program, you'll be in a room of people that share the same thoughts and hopes about you, and in terms of what we can find that nobody else has ever identified before, which Yaniris mentioned at the beginning. So really, a PhD can be really rewarding once you really get to that a final frontier and make a dent in the discovery and what's known. So sometimes PhDs can look like this. Things can be really well and really exciting, but you know, it tends to be a few cases where you really celebrate this, and then you get back to, okay, is this even real? And so you need to start validating and doing more questions, which is part of the process. So it's important to note as well, if we can continue, if you have a why, you can handle anyhow. And this has been my mantra since I started my PhD. And I want to depict this, take this message home with the story of flight, where the Wright brothers, sorry, Orville and Will, the Wright brothers, decided to take on the flight industry and try to develop the first manned flight. And so the Wright brothers found inspiration for their work based on why they would basically take the sales from their small bicycle store and use these funds to propel their work towards making a plane. And they knew why they were doing this and what this could achieve for others. On the other end of this competition of who would be the first manned flight, Samuel Pierpont Langley was also trying to, at the cusp of this finding, except he was a very well-known researcher, very documented expert in astronomy and all these sorts of sciences that allowed him to gather government funding to pursue this. So you have the Wright brothers trying to get money from their bicycle stands and bicycle shop, and then you have Samuel Pierpont Langley, who had all the funds in the world. But the Wright brothers were the first ones that were able to achieve this this finding that nobody else had found before, right? Achieve this goal of flying, and neither of them were right or wrong in their ways of addressing this, whether it was why the Wright brothers felt clear why they were doing it, or how Samuel wanted to insert himself in scientific history by making a really great discovery. Both of these are really important, which brings us to our next point, which is during this PhD marathon, you need to remind yourself and with others why you are doing what you're doing. And this is particularly important to clarify. These two small details will stand out in your applications, and admission committees will notice. They're going through thousands of applications, maybe hundreds of cases, but the importance is that you really want to stand out across these applications, and really thinking deeply, just sitting during an afternoon and thinking a little bit more about why and how you're going to achieve what you want will actually provide the difference. Which takes us to our next point, which is pursuing a PhD is a long-term decision. And with that being said, you can treat it as a job. It is a training program as well. You will be learning throughout, but there's definitely expectations for this for a PhD. And the idea is that this is a transition point where after you finish this training program / job, you will pivot into better opportunities later on. And salaries, however, during the 5 years, 6 years plus that you work will often not compensate all the work you do. And that's important to realize, because if you are going to PhD for completing financial aspirations, you need to realize that the funding is limited and is not maybe as competitive compared to what your peers in other disciplines or other fields may be earning at your same point in life. So you need to account for that decision. Additionally, the work you do may or may not align. And this is both a good thing and a stressful thing, because it makes transitions confusing. I work with Drosophila with fruit flies, and I've often wondered, well, how can I leverage my skills into other disciplines? And there are many ways, and that's a whole different webinar. But what I do want to showcase with this this little cartoon that you're seeing here is that throughout the years, having a PhD has become more and more desired by different industries and different companies. So once you have a PhD, you can literally go from working in journalism, communications, or go into law, to patent law, or even education. And so there are many possibilities of what you can do after a PhD. But it's important that as you go into this process of applying, you go with intentionality. And you don't need to know what you're going to do in the next 10, 15 years. But we just want to showcase, in case some of you haven't thought about what comes after a PhD, will showcase that there are many possibilities. So this brings us to our next point. If you're still on board and you're still ready for applying to a PhD now, how do you go about it? Now, how many PhD programs should you apply for? Well, that will vary a lot, because as we saw earlier, Jasmine did due diligence, she did research, and she thought out how to plan her next steps, which is something that I'm also hinting here. You really need to go into these websites of PhD programs and really learn and dig deep into what they're requiring and what they're providing. There are small things, even as subtle as in order to graduate, you must have a submitted manuscript, or you must have an accepted manuscript. And those small things may be important for you to know. Maybe you won't understand the context until you arrive, but it's an important question that you need to be sure to think about. Now, as you go throughout your graduate school listing process of determining which schools you want or not, recognize that this is a heavy financial commitment for some. Graduate school application fees application costs are oscillate between $70 and $120 per school. So if you are applying for 10, 20 schools, you can do that math, and it adds up quickly. Now, there are a few waivers available. Someone asked earlier about Científico Latino free waivers, and these waivers are exclusive to our GSMI scholars due to partnerships we have with institutions. However, if you go to international conferences, or at times even email some program directors, there may be arrangements that can be made. So this is an important note of highlighting why you should really go out there during this year and showcase your work, while also learning about programs during these conferences. Now, this last bullet point of compiling your list, Dennisha will really tackle it well later in the talk. But I guess I just want to showcase that if you plan for success, you're gonna be successful, right? So in any way that looks, but really thinking deeply about what schools are in your list, and even whether it snows in that state or it doesn't snow in that state, and you can't handle the cold. Those are important things to consider as well as you're listing these. So we can keep going, and the question begins, how do you apply for a PhD program? And it will depend on prereqs. I hinted at some questions earlier on about some program specific requirements which change. However, I just want to highlight the components regarding standardized testing, because standardized testing, you need to plan for it earlier, because it is a financial commitment and it can be pretty expensive. And if you do need to retake the tests for your specific departments, then that's important to know. So the GRE, or graduate record examinations, are a set of tests. Well, it's actually one test that has been thoroughly recognized throughout the years by graduate programs as being a way to measure analytical, verbal, and quantitative reasoning. And as of this month, the test is 2 hours long. And it's important to know that, because it is a full, pretty much a lot of time that you need to commit towards these 2 hours. But additionally, if we can continue, there's also what are known as subject tests. The GRE has a general test, but then they also have subject tests for specific disciplines that are, for example, psychology, math, which in the general test may tackle some components, but in the subject test, they really go into depth of these specific disciplines. So it's a little longer and it's additional costs. So these are two different costs involved. And now the good thing is that throughout the years, if we can continue, throughout the years, STEM programs specifically have gone through what we call the Grexit, which is a term we developed a couple of years back that describe how some schools are now recognizing that these exams are not really measuring what they had measured, what they were supposed to be measuring. And therefore, graduate programs started removing them from their admission criteria. And so therefore, this is where you really need to do your research like Jasmine did and really make sure you identify which schools are requiring or which don't, because this is a $220 exam, 231 in mainland China. And additionally to the exam, if on the day of the exam, you know which schools you want to submit, you have 4 freebies. However, if you don't know which schools you want to submit on the day of the exam, you need to pay $35 extra for each report to each individual school. And if you're applying to 10, that already adds up quickly. Now, there is such a thing as a test fee reduction program if you do still need to take it. But the important thing about this is that you do need to apply ahead of time. And the process is way more straightforward for programs that are pipeline programs supporting underrepresented minorities going into STEM. However, if you're not part of these programs, but you fit some specific demographic and financial needs assessments, you can apply for them. But again, they need to be at least 2 weeks ahead of time of your test. Now, finally, once again, just double check. This list that I included here, biogre.info and grenotrequired.com, are 2 spreadsheets that we've compiled throughout the years, and maybe biogre.info may not be working as that, but we'll include the link later on in the chat. So it's important to understand that there are resources out there that you can reach out to and look up this information without having to email departments or programs, because as someone had mentioned, sometimes you may not be lucky to contact an administrative person. And so therefore, either students become your resources or existing resources like these ones are available. So we can continue. If you do still need to take the test, it's important to consider that there are options for taking the test at home. However, you do need to be aware of that if you are taking it at home, something as simple as your dog, your roommate, your parents entering the room will automatically flag as a problem. So you need to have very stringent room requirements. They have very stringent requirements on that, and also electronic requirements. So and make sure to check out the website if you are thinking of taking it at home. However, there are standardized testing centers have opened after COVID kind of like went down a little bit. Now, they also provide accommodations for test takers with disabilities. And just as we talked about earlier with the 50% fee reduction, you need to do this very, very well ahead of time. And so we can continue on that section. And I kind of describe in these slides when you should submit these requests. And so just make sure you apply for them on time. So now, once you get your scores, it's important to consider specifically what program you're applying for. Many of you here may be applying for STEM programs, and therefore maybe the quantitative sections may be important, or maybe the verbal sections are. And so in that sense, if you want to interpret your data, this brief slide will describe this. So if you can continue, I have the GRE is divided into these sections: verbal, quant, and analytical writing. And the GRE scores average based on the GRE reports are around 151 on verbal and 156 on quant. And regarding analytical writing, which is like pretty much an essay, it's about 3.4. Now, if you really want to have a great score, you're looking at something above 160. So this is just brief measure of how to gauge your test. And GRE does have options for taking your best test scores and submitting them. And so we won't get into that, but if you have questions on that, let me know. And so the other exam that is actually arguably more required these days than the GRE are English language proficiency exams, such as the TOEFL, IELTS, or a new one that has come, which is the Duolingo English test. Now, you may ask yourself, do I need to take the TOEFL or these exams? And the question lies in this little graph that I developed a couple of years back, where if English is your native language, TOEFL is not required. But if it's not, then you can go under a subcategory, which is if you obtain your bachelor's degree in the US or an institution where the primary mode of instruction was English, you can prove that then they won't require the TOEFL. However, if you can, then the TOEFL may be required. There are intricacies on this because, for example, if a graduate program doesn't know that Puerto Rico, where I'm from at least, official languages are English and Spanish, and they just think that Puerto Rico's mode of instruction is Spanish, they may not understand that why you would or would not need to take the TOEFL. So in that sense, you don't need to go into depth explaining to institutions how the politics and why we speak English as a colony. But for example, you may need to explain kind of, hey, I'm proficient. Can I have an interview with the director or with someone ahead of time? And then kind of make a case for that. And there are ways to be strategic about this. If you do need to take the test, these are tests that are valid for 2 years. And once again, they are just as expensive as the GREs that I showed you earlier. Now, these tests are testing, or excuse the redundancy, but these tests are measuring both academic and non-academic English. So in that sense, programs value them differently. Both the TOEFL and the IELTS, which are 255 and 280 plus, varying by country, are academic tests. The English that they really ask about and they use for designing the test is very formal, and therefore it has a different weight. Additionally, in order to send the scores to individual universities, such as we saw earlier with the GRE, it was $35. These are $20 each. However, there are some good news in that Duolingo, yes, the app where you can learn languages, came up recently with a department to make English testing a thing, right? They are testing specifically for general tests. They're not as academic, and there are a couple of pros and cons about that. But the tests are much cheaper than what the TOEFL or IELTS have. So you have $65 for one test, or $115 for two. And in contrast to its counterparts, there's no cost to sending scores to schools. Now, that's a really big pro because then you don't have to pay so much, right, for each school. But the little asterisk here is that not every school yet has jumped on board, and not every STEM program has jumped on board. Mostly the schools that are taking and accepting this exam for English language proficiency are schools that are measuring undergrad levels. So if you're applying to undergrad, the DET may be good, but maybe not for graduate programs. Now, once again, make sure you ask for fee waivers. And if once again get ghosted or someone doesn't answer, I have compiled a couple of years back a PhD TOEFL list, which includes schools' minimum scores and school codes and program links, which you can check out just as the GRE exit links. So we can continue. And now we're getting into, once again, kind of the scores. So the TOEFL, which is once again the more predominantly accepted, is composed of 4 sections with 30 points each. The test is around 2 hours. And there's such a thing as cut scores they mentioned across different schools. And the scores are received 4 days after taking the test. So that gives you a really good turnaround time to repeat it if you need to. Now, it's important to understand that program policies may require the TOEFL or English language proficiency, may not, so admissions may not require it. But once you get into these programs, if you, for example, have TA as a requirement throughout your grad school applications, throughout your grad school process, you will have to showcase some English proficiency. And therefore, it's important to understand this caveat where even though you may join a program that may not necessarily upfront require you to take English language exams, you may later on need them, because it's important to be able to communicate with the students and provide a fluid TA experience as well. But this will vary by program. And this is just again, one slide to summarize the average scores if you have taken the TOEFL and you need to gauge where you are in across the spectrum. So yep, we can continue. Now it's important to clarify, when you go into the TOEFL website, there are a couple of options. First, you have the TOEFL IBT, which is the internet-based test, and then you have the TOEFL Essentials. These are two different tests, and they are different once again because they are measuring different types of English. One is more academic and formal than the other. And with that being said, comes a price adjusted to that, which is the most widely accepted program, if we can continue, are the IBTs that are $255, and the Essentials are $120. So it's important to understand that sadly, up to this day, the $255 one is the one that schools will require you for. And then one really bad thing about the TOEFL, where it's that the TOEFL is really meant for helping students get into undergrad, and therefore there are no fee waivers for this test. So you have to pay the $255 completely. They won't waive it for you unless you're a high school senior. Now, the other thing that's been emerging, as I mentioned, the Duolingo English test has become more and more accepted across institutions. And this is a research paper that they just did. They looked at different testing across graduate programs, and they found that across R1 universities, and unconditional means that you can take the test and you don't need anything else. Whereas conditional means that you need to take the test and also take, for example, a course in English and supplement the scores that you got from the test with some extra layers of support. And as you can see, both the TOEFL IBT and the IELTS, which are the most broadly accepted, at 116, 117, are about twice as the DET. However, the DET came up a couple of years back. So it may be possible that some R1 institutions that some of you are applying to already have Duolingo embedded in their admission criteria. And so in that sense, feel free to ask the programs as well. So this next section, I think we can take questions at the end, just so we can get to all of them correctly, and we can all present, right? I don't want to get into anybody's time, but we're gonna pretty go swiftly on this graduate school application timeline. Next couple of 5 slides just refer to month by month what you should be doing. In September, you want to be preparing for these tests, both the GRE and the TOEFL, thinking about what resources are out there and checking out your local library or online resources like Magoosh. And really think about whether your dream program needs a GRE or not, so that you can take it and account for the financial expenses that will come. If we can continue, September, along these lines, as you're preparing for test taking, you also want to be on the lookout for your graduate school for your graduate school of choice. So want to make that list, start thinking about what these individual schools are requiring of you, and ask for strong letters of rec, which is a good point for basically telling your mentors and previous mentors, hey, I need letters of recommendation that are strong. And that's a whole conversation for another seminar, but this intentionality is important because there is such a thing as a bad letter. October will be pretty much taking the exams if needed once again, and attending different conferences. Applicants, for example, is in November, and so you can start planning for assisting some of these. And remind your letter writers about the recommendations constantly. This timeline is fitting for most STEM programs. However, it's notable that if you are interested in ecology and evolutionary biology, computer science, and psychology, you will need to contact professors at certain universities ahead of time. And that's important because the idea is that you really want to make an impression and really make a connection with these professors ahead of time, so that then once you're affiliated with them, they can vouch for you as you're applying for the program. And November, December, you're starting to celebrate all the work you've done through the last couple of months and really finally edit those personal statements. They will never be fully ready, but they will be at a really good point if you start them on time. And make sure to start asking about fee waivers. This is an important point to start asking about them. And yeah, note that most application deadlines are early December. So with that being said, I think this is just a final timetable that calls a snippet of the requirements that you can definitely look up after this presentation is done. But yeah, without further ado, I want to leave it up to Dennisha so she can take y'all. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much, Aníbal. Just in the last 10 minutes, we're just going to talk about after submitting graduate school applications and go through some advice. So for PhD program notifications, this is December to February. You should hear back by the end of February from biology related programs about an interview. If you do not hear back from them, you may be waitlisted, and as they go through their list of waitlists, then maybe you'll get a notification or they'll let you know if you're not accepted. And for this, you'd want to consider a prep program, which we will have a later webinar about. A graduate school interview is not an acceptance, but schools only invite candidates that they're really interested in accepting since they have limited spots. For international students, you may have a Skype or Zoom or phone interview before an in-person interview invitation is sent. For the non-biology programs, they will notify you of an acceptance via email and have visiting weekends after acceptance for you to, travel and get to know the school. So for PhD program recruitment weekends, biological and biomedical, so this is January to March. Non-biology is usually January through early April. And you really want to take advantage of these weekends because here you get to see for yourself what the campus is like, what the atmosphere is like, what the labs look like. Some universities have open lab concepts where at other universities, some labs are a bunch of different rooms that are a little isolated. So you might, find out if that environment works for you or does not. You get to interview with faculty members, interact with the graduate students, which is really important. If you keep seeing the same 5 graduate students, that's a red flag. You want to see that graduate students are happy and showing up to recruitment weekend, because that's a good gauge of whether, that's a good program or not. You'll be able to tour the campus, get a feel of the city. Is it walkable? Is it livable? PhD program acceptance offers and STEM, this usually occurs during February to April. And the offer will include more information about, the monthly stipend and things of the program. PhD program decisions, the deadline is April 15th for you to accept the PhD program offer, or you can kindly decline the other programs that you're not interested in. Remember to email and or tweet everyone that helped you get to this moment, from family to your letter writers, your recommenders, and even your GSMI mentors. Okay, so we're just briefly gonna touch again on the graduate school application components. the online application, so this is your background, your demographics, your education. These are always going to be the easiest things to fill out when you go to start your application. This is just like, racial identity, things like transcripts, stuff like that. Those are the easiest components to just knock out when you start any application. And you can always save and then go back and continue your application, right? Transcripts, usually they'll ask for an unofficial version. So with that, you can just get a PDF of your transcript and submit that. So in some cases, once you're admitted, then they'll ask for an official copy. It just depends on the program. Your CV, resume, we will have a webinar on how to perfect your CV, but this is just an overview of your academic and extracurricular activities. And then letters of recommendation. So this is really, really important that you choose the right people. You want advisors who can talk about your scientific and personal qualities. So not just, you as an academic researcher or scientist, but you as an individual. You also want them to be able to describe the nature of your relationship. So you want to pick a mentor who is somewhat close to you, they know you well. Maybe, you really enjoyed their class and it was a class you participated well in. You saw them in office hours, things like that. Someone who can really attest to, your academic skills as well as who you are as a person. Are you a dedicated student? Are you someone who puts in extra hours in lab, things like that. And then finally, the most important piece, I would argue, is the personal statement. So this will talk about your scientific interests, your research experience, as well as your professional goals and your interest in the program and your biographical details. So with your personal statement, depending on if it's going to be just a research statement or a personal statement, with the research statement, you would be focusing just on, your scientific interest and your research experience. Whereas with the personal statement, you're telling more of an overall story. So the reviewers who are reading your application can get a snapshot into what your experiences have been like and how that transitions into your future goals and how the program that you're applying to will help you accomplish that. So to get into some advice, one thing I want to say is get organized early. If you want to apply to more than one school, I applied to, I think, 10, 11 schools, something like that. And it gets very, very easy to become disorganized. I would recommend doing an Excel spreadsheet, which I will put the link in the chat at the end. But one idea of how to do this, first column, make a to-do list for yourself. Second column, names of the programs, what type of program it is, and the deadline. Then you want to make sure, this was touched on earlier. For me, I did 3 professors that I was interested in working with at that program, but you want to at least have 3 to 5, I would say is a good number of professors who you would consider working with at whatever program you're applying to. And then in the next columns, you want to have the website. So make sure you read the program website so that way you know the requirements, things about the department, and this will be your way to gauge that you actually like the program and it's worth your time because you don't want to do all this work for nothing. If you're going to email the professors, that should be a column as well so that you can keep track of whether or not you sent them an email. And then your CV. Do you have your updated CV? Have you uploaded it? Your statement? Have you been working on your statement? Is that uploaded and submitted to the application? Your personal history, is that required? And then you want to keep track of your recommendation letters. So depending on the program, sometimes they'll ask for 3 recommendation letters, or you can submit up to 5 recommendation letters, depending on the program requirements. You want to make sure that you're emailing your professors and reminding them to submit, because often they have to submit directly to the program. They can't send it to you and then you upload. Often they have to submit on your behalf, so it's direct. So you want to make sure you're reminding them. And in the application, you're putting their emails down early so that they're getting the notification for them to submit their recommendation letters. Your transcript, you want to make sure you have a copy of that. If you have to take the GRE, you want to make sure that if the program requires you to take the GRE, you have that, you have your score, you can send it. If you have to pay, or if you're going to be able to get a fee waiver, things like that. And then the rest you guys can view on your own once I drop the link in the chat. But once again, it's important to, whatever system works for you, get organized. This might look painful, but I promise it's worth taking the time to just keep on track, because you don't want to take yourself out of the run-in just because you forgot to submit one document and now your entire application gets discounted. So get organized early. Some extra tips to consider: proofread. I know sometimes when I write something, my brain will automatically do this ADHD thing where I fill in the blanks, even though it's not there, or I skip over spelling mistakes because I know in my head what I wanted to say, but that's not exactly what's on paper. So make sure, you have your mentor or friends of yours reading your personal statements or reading over your CV, for example, to make sure that, someone else can catch any of these errors. Do not just list your CV. Make sure that you take your time to look at good examples. Please look at the CL website. We offer tons of examples as well as writing help there. Make sure you're telling a story with your application. Especially in writing your research statement, you want to really make yourself stand out, right? And also engage the reviewer that's going to be reading your application. Reach out to graduate students and postdocs working in the lab of your interests. Always, always, always talk to students. I would recommend doing Zoom calls because people are going to be more honest and more direct when you're talking to them face to face as opposed to emailing them. So I would say reach out, ask them if they're willing to, a 30-minute chat on Zoom. A lot of people are willing to help. I get emails all the time. It's go through the department website, cold email someone and ask them if they'll talk to you, and you'll get a good idea of whether or not you'll be a good fit for that program from that. Lastly, don't focus on negative aspects. I know sometimes some people can have different experiences in different labs, but sometimes, if something's a right fit for you, then only you can decide that. So, you might be getting a lot of advice from a lot of different people, but you also have to listen to your internal voice and decide for yourself, what you want to do and what's going to be the best decision for you, because again, it's a huge commitment. It's a lot of years and time spent being a graduate student. So again, common errors, proofread several times, check your typos, make sure the university and department programs, the names are correct, because you'll often be able to reuse your personal statement and just change a few details like the professors of interest, the program name, things like that. So you want to make sure you don't make any mistakes. Say you're applying to Harvard, you want to put Columbia on that. Make sure these are correct for each school you're applying to. Again, don't list your resume. This is your chance to convey your personality and your passion. You want to make sure that you're going into details about your research experience and things like that. Again, convey your messages clearly and concisely. Some readers will skim. Don't put any irrelevant details, but make sure you're telling your story in a very clear and concise way. And again, don't focus on any negatives, again, especially in your application. For me, one of my main worries when I was applying was I had a D in inorganic chemistry. And so the GPA was something that was scary for me, because I was they might look at my transcript and see that I didn't do so well in this class. But instead of focusing on that, I instead chose to focus on the fact that in all of my lab courses, I did well. And so don't focus on any of the negatives. Always focus on the positive aspects of your application, because you're not one grade, you're not one bad grade, you're not your GPA, you are more than that. And oftentimes they will look at your application in a holistic manner. Lastly, faculty members writing letters of recommendation, they can also support your narrative and development. So if there's something in your application that you're worried about, for example, again, if the bad grades is something that's like weighing heavy on you, you can always ask your recommenders to talk about, how hard the program is at your undergrad institution, but also focusing on how hard of a worker you are. For example, maybe you didn't do so well in a class. Your recommender could say, like, this person showed up at office hours every day. They worked really hard. They really put in the time, and overall their grades were able to improve. So again, always focus on the positives. And with that, I will take any questions. Thank you guys so much for attending. Please, if you have time, fill out the post survey. We just want to make sure that this webinar was actually helpful. And with that, I'll stop share so I can read some of these questions. Okay, so the first question that's asking about lack of research experiences, I would say one thing that I did in my applications, I focused on more classes that I did that related to doing research. So at the time, I had only done one summer research experience, and with that, I had a couple classes that were research heavy, and this involved like literature reviews, things like that. So I chose to focus on that rather than the actual hands-on research. But then also too, if you feel like you're lacking overall research experience, another thing you can do is do a postbac. I highly recommend postbac programs. I'm a product of a postbac program, and with that, I had an independent project, and it was a very rewarding experience because I also had, mentors who were holding my hand through the graduate school process, in addition to the mentors I had while I was doing research, which made me fall in love with research, really. So if there's any like confusion on whether you still want to, go to grad school or not, I would always recommend doing a postbac program. There's another question in the chat about pointers for making first contact. I definitely think if you're reaching out to a professor, you want to show them that you've done your research, you've done your homework, right? Because people don't want to feel like they're wasting their time by talking to you and investing in you. So I would always recommend reading a PI's website, look for their lab website, look for their bio on the department website, read whatever current projects they have in the lab at that time, but also I would just read the abstract of their latest paper. And if it's something that's in your field, you can be like, hey, I read your paper on X, Y, and Z, and I thought X, Y, and Z about it. It was really interesting. And I have this experience doing similar research. I'm wondering if you would be interested in chatting with me, or are you taking graduate students? I'm in the middle of applying to this program. And there you have the transition. For students, you don't need to do all that. For a student, another grad student, you can just literally just be like, hey, I saw you on this person's website. I'm interested in your PI, or like, I'm interested in this program, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to talk to me about life as a graduate student here. Simple. I know cold emailing is hard. I have anxiety. I don't like to email people, so I get it. Relatable content, but just email them. It's the worst thing that can happen is they don't respond, and then you just email somebody else. It's okay. Let me see.
I think I'd like to bring up one of the questions that I tried addressing earlier, but it was a very specific question on a student having 4 publications and they're showing their scores for GRE there in the comment, but they're asking if their qualifications of both scores and standardized testing and publication track are strong enough for landing a fully funded PhD program in the US, or what they need to improve before applying. And so I guess I just wanted to open that up to others. My impression was that 4 publications is something almost unheard of for many even applicants. So at least I didn't have a publication before getting into my PhD. So having 4 themselves is quite impressive. But again, we can't really state whether that will be enough or not, because every year there are different applicants, and every year maybe student research interest align with the department better than other students' research interests. And so those are small considerations that you're not responsible for, but decisions happen behind the scenes where they have to define like, oh, I like that student for my lab. I would probably send them an invite. But yeah, I don't know if y'all want to add on that.
Yeah, I think in general, I did not have a single publication. I did do like presentations for your class. If you do a poster as a part of coursework that you did, definitely put that on your CV. That does count. But I didn't have an actual publication, and I didn't let that stop me because again, you're not just one aspect of your application. They're going to look at you as a whole person, what you've been doing over the course of, you know, your undergrad career, what kind of coursework you did, what you're passionate about. And if you're able to, I don't want to say market yourself, but you kind of have to market yourself. If you're able to talk about like, you know, your passion and how you're going to use that opportunity in that PhD program to really grow and learn as a scientist, and how that's going to take you to your future goal, that is most important, I think, because programs want to invest in people who they think are, one, going to be successful in the PhD program and actually need the PhD to be successful, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say. So I wouldn't worry too much about publications, because please keep in mind, you can be in a cohort of people who took 10 years off from undergrad and worked in industry and did a completely different path before they got to grad school. So there can very well be someone who has 15 publications versus someone who has 0. And that's fine. That is okay. Everyone's on their own journey. Let's see. I personally don't think there's any automatic screening that weeds out the low GPA test scores. At least I'm not aware of that. I don't know of that being a thing that happens. I can only talk about how I've seen our process get done. And here at the University of Rochester, they're very much going to look at a holistic approach. I'd also like to mention that there are some universities that tell you not to put your GPA on your CV. So that way they're blinded to both test scores and GPA before they even go deep into your application. So there are some universities that will be like, don't even submit your GPA, right? Definitely send us, you know, your transcript so they can see that you have the background, the coursework to be in that program, but they will say like, we don't need to see your grades or your GPA. So I'm not sure that I know anything about that. Does anyone else? Okay. Personal work experience. I think, I don't know. I don't know how to answer this question that's talking about including work experience as a part of like an explanation for like lack of research experience. Personally, again, I would not focus on the lack of research experience. I would instead like focus on talking up on whatever research experience you do have, because to me, I genuinely feel like you only need one good one. And that way you could really like talk deeply about like how, you know, it was exciting for you or what you learned or what you didn't learn and what you want to learn from your next research experience. That's the way I view it. So I think you kind of have to like shift your perspective of, instead of trying to like, you know, fill in the gap or fill in the holes that you think are there, focus on the positive and then like again, drive home the point of like, yes, my research experiences might be limited, but like I did this one research experience and I've been like hooked for life. I've been craving research ever since. Like this is what has propelled me into this passion, and that's why I'm going to get a PhD. So that would be my advice, at least. Let's see, are there any other questions that haven't been addressed? Yes, if your work experience is related to why you want to pursue a PhD, yes, you should mention it. Yeah, if it's related, then you can mention it. If your application in general does not ask for GRE scores, I wouldn't send them. Again, I never took the GRE. Thankfully, I applied only to schools that did not require the GRE. Some people think that maybe if a school is like, oh, you don't have to, it might count against you. But I would only, in that case, if it's optional, I would only send it if it was like almost perfect or like really, really high. Because again, like they're looking at other aspects of your application as well. So if it's optional, I wouldn't send it unless you really want to. Okay, I will resend the link for the spreadsheet. With that being said, are there any last questions that we missed?
I'd like to just kind of bring up one last question. Jose asked about what is considered a good GPA and what it would it depend on the program. I think this question applies also for research. And Dennisha kind of hinted at it earlier. It's not about the amount of research you have, it's about it, really the quality at times. And programs consider that first years in undergrad may be bumpy, but they do kind of analyze your progress as you went through your undergrad, all these experiences that led you to increasing your GPA throughout the years, or maybe having some bumps on the road, are important parts of your story and your narrative. So a good GPA, arguably for some like really top programs, will be important, and I think it ranges from three and up maybe, but that will vary a lot. But ultimately, you're in these programs to do research, and you really want to focus on just showcasing the best research out there, and they need you to achieve their goals. So really focusing on the research, and maybe not only individual or limited experiences of research, but if you have longer term research experiences, as Anisha said, that's all you really need to be able to talk deeply and thoroughly about your process of taking a project from one point to the final point. So yeah, it will vary a lot.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much more of our time. Are there any last minute advice that the panel would like to give?
So I do want to address Jorge's question about his specific field, and not a lot of people focusing on that specific thing that they're interested in. And so their question was, how do you handle applying to a project that is not in your particular interest? So short answer, I don't advise working for 4 or 5 years in something that you're not interested in. So what I would do in that case is go through faculty members in your program and find that person that has something remotely related to what you're interested in, and try to discuss potential project with that person that can actually be a nice merge between what they're interested in and what you're interested in. And I think generally faculty are open to those kinds of ideas and those kinds of conversations. And I think this is a really good case in which emailing faculty and advice in advance would definitely be very useful and beneficial for you.
Yeah, I just want to say, once again, if you know your why, you can handle anyhow. So that's my mantra.
Yeah, I just want to say trust yourself and organize yourself while you apply and try to keep things, try to be on top of things because a lot is going on. And then don't second guess yourself. Like, don't count yourself out of programs. Don't feel intimidated by hearing other people comment stuff, whether this is in interviews or when you're talking about programs that you're excited about. At the end of the day, the program is the only one that gets to decide if you get a spot or not. Don't count yourself out. You got this.
Okay, and with that, I would just like to thank our panelists. Thank you guys so much for your time. And thank you guys for attending our first webinar of the season. I hope it was helpful. If you have any other questions, always feel free to email us. And best of luck. Thank you, everyone.